What is a compressor and how does it work? A compressor is really just a very fast volume control. It's used to decrease the volume dynamics of a signal. It makes the loudest parts and the quietest parts of a signal closer by briefly turning down the volume of the loudest parts when they get too loud. It's kind of like if you were listening to music and you had your hand on the volume control, and anytime the volume gets too loud, you briefly turn down the volume. And then when things return to a more comfortable volume, you turn it back up to where you had it. The point at which you start turning down the volume is called the threshold. The threshold is the point at which the compressor starts reducing volume. How fast you turn down the volume is called the attack. The attack is how fast the compressor turns down the volume. How fast you turn the volume back up after the volume goes below the threshold, again, is called the release. The release is how fast the compressor turns the volume back up. The amount a signal gets turned down is called gain reduction. The amount of gain reduction is determined by the ratio. The ratio is written in terms of x to 1. You control x. Every time the volume goes x decibels over the threshold, the compressor only allows the signal to go 1 decibel over the threshold. It does that by reducing the gain, or turning down the volume. So at a 2-to-1 ratio, a sound that goes 2 decibels over the threshold will only be allowed to go 1 decibel over the threshold. If it goes 4 decibels over the threshold, the compressor will only allow it to go 2 decibels over the threshold. At a 4-to-1 ratio, every time the signal goes 4 decibels above the threshold, the compressor only allows it to go 1 decibel over the threshold. So if it goes 8 decibels over the threshold, the compressor will only allow it to go 2 decibels over the threshold. And if it goes 2 decibels over the threshold, the compressor only allows it to go 0.5 decibels over the threshold. A 1-to-1 ratio means no compression happens, no gain reduction, no changes in volume. An infinity-to-1 ratio means that the signal will never go more than 1 decibel over the threshold. To compensate for this gain reduction, we often use a makeup gain. The makeup gain now turns up the overall volume of the signal. So we've taken our dynamic range, our loudest sounds and our quietest sounds, and we've lowered it by turning down the loudest parts. And now we use the makeup gain to turn everything up. This makes it easier to hear the louder and the quieter parts because the sound is now less dynamic. Now, just don't overdo it. Compression is best used subtly. We sometimes can hear sounds better when we reduce the range, but if we do that to everything too much, our sound becomes squished and static, and it doesn't have the bounce and movement that we often want our music to have. How much you compress something will probably depend on the kind of music that you're producing. A compressor works best on sounds that have very loud parts and quieter parts. Things like drums and vocals are very common for compression. Let's listen to this drum beat. We have a lot of movement. We can see those loud parts and quieter parts. And now we're going to put a compressor on this. You can see our signal right here. And this blue line is our threshold. I'm going to lower this so that we're just getting the loudest parts. And now this orange line is our gain reduction. That's the amount the compressor is turning down the volume. We can also see the value down here. Right now we're doing a 4-to-1 ratio, which means anytime the sound goes 4 decibels over the threshold, it will only allow the sound to go up 1 decibel. We're compressing it very quickly with an almost instant attack, and we're releasing very quickly too. If we were to raise the attack a little bit, we'll see that a little bit of that initial sound starts to come through, and it changes how much our gain gets reduced. And if I go far enough, we won't really see any compression at all. To show you the effect of the compressor on the waveform, we're going to record this into a new audio track. Here we can see that the peaks are much lower. This snare drum does not get quite as loud because it's being compressed. Now I'm going to turn the ratio way up. And I'm going to roll back the attack a little bit so we can see how this affects the look of the volume of our waveform. Now we can see that the initial sound of our drum comes through a bit, and then it is squished down, pretty drastically. So we get a little bit of that initial attack because we had a slower attack on our compressor, but since the ratio is so high, it gets squeezed down quite a bit. And now you can see our hi-hat sounds are almost the same volume as our snare and kick sounds. So that's what a compressor is, and that's how it works. I'm Brian Funk. Check out my website at brianfunk.com. I have Ableton Live packs, educational materials. I host the Music Production Podcast, which is a show about all things making music. And I get to talk to a lot of really interesting people, and I learned so much on the show. Check all that out at my website, brianfunk.com. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.